Blood smeared across the white linoleum in erratic patterns, dragging from the ambulance bay straight through the emergency department doors. Security guards closed in on the woman in scrubs, hands reaching, voices sharp. While outside, through the rain-streaked windows, 3 black vehicles with government plates pulled into the hospital lot. Nobody saw the dog tag tucked beneath her collar. Nobody knew why she kept staring at the dying man on the gurney like she'd seen this exact nightmare before. But in 90 seconds, the nurse they were about to throw out would become the only person in Ridgemont General Hospital who understood what was really happening and why every second of hesitation would cost lives. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you want to know how this ends, how the woman they humiliated became the one they couldn't survive without, stay until the very last word. Hit that like button and let me know you're here. The fluorescent lights in Ridgemont General's emergency department buzzed with that particular frequency that meant one of the ballasts was dying. Emma Reeves had noticed it 3 weeks ago. She'd mentioned it twice to maintenance. Nobody fixed anything around here unless it bled or billed. She stood at the nurse's station, finishing her 14th hour on shift, and her back felt like someone had driven nails through her spine at regular intervals. Coffee had stopped working around hour 9. Now she was running on muscle memory and spite. Reeves! She didn't turn immediately. That voice, cold, clipped, expensive, belonged to Dr. Jonathan Pritchard, Ridgemont General's chief medical officer, and the kind of man who wore his authority like cologne. Too much of it. Always. Dr. Pritchard? Emma kept her eyes on the chart she was updating. A 17-year-old with a broken wrist from skateboarding. Straightforward. The kind of case that didn't require her to think about sand or screaming or the way blood looked different in desert heat. We need to talk about your performance. Now she looked up. Pritchard stood with his arms crossed, flanked by 2 of the day shift physicians who always laughed at his jokes. Dr. Miles Kenton, who'd failed his boards twice before passing. Dr. Sarah Vega, who wore her Yale degree like armor but couldn't place a central line without 3 attempts. My performance, Emma repeated. Your attitude, Pritchard corrected. Your persistent overstepping of your role. You're a registered nurse, not an attending physician. Emma set down her pen. Around them, the ER continued its usual chaos. Phones ringing, monitors beeping, someone's grandmother demanding to see a doctor immediately for what sounded like gas. What did I overstep? Kenton smirked. You countermanded Dr. Vega's discharge order for the patient in Bay 7. The patient in Bay 7 had a blood pressure of 90/60 and was complaining of chest pain, Emma said. Her voice stayed level. She'd learned that in places where staying level meant staying alive. Discharging someone with those vitals is a medical decision, Pritchard interrupted. Made by a physician, not questioned by nursing staff. Something flickered across Emma's face. Not anger. Something colder. The patient had an MI 30 minutes after I insisted on keeping her. If she'd gone home, lucky guess, saying, Vega's voice dripped condescension. You don't get to play doctor because you watched some TV show. The air in Emma's lungs felt suddenly thin. She could hear rotors, smell fuel, feel sand in her teeth. Then she blinked, and it was just fluorescent lights and disinfectant again. Noted, she said quietly. Pritchard leaned against the counter. This isn't the first incident. You've been here 8 months, and I have a file of complaints. You question orders, you contradict physicians, you act like you're running a field hospital instead of working in a professional medical facility. Field hospital. Emma's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I follow protocol, she said. You follow your own protocol, Pritchard shot back. Which might have flown wherever you worked before, but here? We have standards, we have hierarchy, and if you can't respect that... The ambulance bay doors exploded open. Everyone turned. 2 paramedics burst through, faces pale, pushing a gurney at a dead run. The man strapped to it was convulsing, full-body seizures that made the restraints rattle. His skin had a gray-blue tinge that Emma recognized immediately, though she hadn't seen it in 4 years. Unknown male, approximately 40, found unresponsive at Greyhound Station. The lead paramedic, Travis, Emma knew his name, gasped out the words while running. Witnesses said he collapsed mid-sentence. Vitals all over the place. Temps 104 and climbing. Pupils blown. He's been seizing for 6 minutes straight. The ER erupted into motion. Physicians scattered. Nurses grabbed equipment. Someone yelled for intubation supplies. Emma didn't move. She stood perfectly still, staring at the patient, at the way his muscles locked and released, at the specific pattern of the tremors, at the foam coming from his mouth, not white, but faintly pink. "Reeves, we need hands," someone shouted. She walked toward the gurney slowly, too slowly, like she was moving through water, Travis noticed. "Emma, you good?" She didn't answer. Her eyes tracked across the patient's exposed skin. There, along his left forearm. Discoloration. Not bruising. Something else. And his fingernails. The beds were dark. Not cyanosis. Different. "Get me his bag," Emma said. "What?" "The paramedic bag. His belongings. Now." Travis hesitated, then grabbed a plastic bag from the gurney's lower rack. Emma snatched it, dumped the contents onto the counter. Wallet, keys, phone, loose change, a crumpled bus ticket, and a small glass vial, empty, with residue coating the inside. Emma's hand froze above it. "Don't touch that," she said sharply. Everyone in the immediate vicinity stopped. "Reeves, what the hell?" Pritchard started. "Don't touch it." Emma's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Nobody touches anything this patient came in with. Nobody touches him without full barrier protection. And someone needs to seal this room, right now." Kenton laughed. Actually laughed. "Are you serious? He's overdosing. Probably fentanyl or—" "That's not an overdose." Emma's eyes stayed locked on the vial. "That's exposure." Silence dropped over the trauma bay like a curtain. Pritchard stepped forward, his face darkening. "Nurse Reeves, you need to step back and let the physicians evacuate this room," Emma said. Her voice didn't rise, didn't waver. "Seal the ventilation. Nobody leaves without decontamination protocol. And someone call the CDC, now." "The CDC?" Vega's voice pitched high. "For an overdose? You've lost your mind." Emma turned to look at her. The expression on her face made Vega take a step back. "That vial contains chemical residue consistent with organophosphate nerve agent exposure," Emma said quietly. "The symptom presentation, seizures, respiratory distress, that specific pattern of muscle fasciculation, the pink foam indicating pulmonary edema, matches acute poisoning. If I'm wrong, you can fire me. If I'm right, and you ignore this, everyone in this room could be dead in an hour." The monitors attached to the patient started screaming. His seizure intensified. Blood began streaming from his nose. His back arched so severely that the restraints cut into his skin. Then one of the nurses who'd been standing closest to the gurney, Jessica, young, just out of school, stumbled backward. "I don't feel good," she whispered. Her legs gave out. She hit the floor hard, and then she started seizing too. Chaos detonated. People screamed, someone ran for the exit. Another nurse dropped to help Jessica, then staggered, pressing her hand to her head. "Nobody move!" Emma's voice cracked through the panic like a gunshot. "Everyone who touched the patient or his belongings, stay still. Everyone else, back away slowly. Don't run. Don't touch your face. Don't touch anything." "You don't give orders here." Pritchard's face had gone purple. "Security! Get her out of—" "Do it, and you kill everyone in this hospital," Emma said flatly. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was already moving, grabbing gloves, masks, anything she could find. "This is airborne secondary exposure. That means ventilation is compromised. Running spreads it faster. Opening doors spreads it faster. We have maybe 3 minutes before this entire wing is contaminated." Travis, the paramedic, had gone white. "Jesus Christ, what do we do?" Emma's hands moved with mechanical precision, snapping on gloves, pulling on a mask. "Shut down the HVAC system for this wing, now. Someone hit the emergency ventilation shutoff. It's the red panel by the main desk. And get every crash cart in this department into this room. We're going to need atropine, lots of it." "Atropine?" Kenton's voice shook. "That's for—" "Nerve agent exposure, yes." Emma grabbed a cart, started pulling medications. 2 milligrams IV push for anyone showing symptoms. Repeat every 5 minutes until secretions dry up. And someone get me pralidoxime chloride from the pharmacy. We'll need— Another nurse collapsed, then a physician. The screaming intensified. Pritchard grabbed Emma's arm, spinning her around. "You're finished here! Security!" Two security guards appeared at the trauma bay entrance. "Remove her," Pritchard ordered. Emma looked at his hand on her arm, then at his face. "You're going to want to let go. I'm going to want to watch you leave in handcuffs." The patient on the gurney stopped seizing, just stopped. His eyes rolled back, the monitors flatlined. Emma pulled free from Pritchard's grip, moved to the gurney, started CPR. Her hands locked, shoulders over the patient's chest, compression depth exactly right. "Someone bag him," she ordered, "and somebody with sense shut down that ventilation before this spreads to pediatrics." "Don't listen to her," Pritchard shouted. "She's—" A third person collapsed. One of the security guards who'd just arrived. He hit the ground like a dropped stone, twitching. The other guard backed away, eyes wide. "What the hell is happening?" "Nerve agent exposure," Emma said, without stopping compressions. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions. "Chemical weapon, probably military grade based on the presentation speed. Someone shut down the ventilation." Travis ran. Emma heard him shouting something about the main system. "You can't possibly know that," Vega said, but her voice had lost its certainty. "No?" Emma didn't look up. "Want to bet your life on it?" The lights flickered. Then the constant hum of the HVAC system, that background noise nobody ever noticed until it stopped, cut out. Silence except for the alarms and the crying. Emma continued CPR. "Atropine. Now. Everyone who touched the patient gets 2 milligrams IV. Everyone who's symptomatic gets 4. Move." "You're not a doctor," Pritchard said, but the fight had drained from his voice. "No," Emma agreed. Her arms burned. Sweat dripped down her spine. "But I've treated this exact scenario before. So unless you've got battlefield experience with chemical weapons exposure in a mass casualty situation, I suggest you start listening." For the first time in her 8 months at Ridgemont General, nobody argued. Nurses started grabbing supplies. Someone found atropine. Someone else ran for the pharmacy. Emma kept compressions going. 27, 28, 29, 30. "Bag." A respiratory therapist appeared, started ventilating. "Atropine," Emma said. A syringe appeared in her peripheral vision. She grabbed it without looking, found the patient's IV port, pushed the medication. Nothing happened. Again. Another syringe. Another push. The patient's chest hitched. Monitors blipped. Not a rhythm. Not yet. But something. "Third dose." "That's 6 milligrams, someone said. "I can count." Emma pushed it. "Someone check on the nurses who went down. They need atropine too. Symptoms?" "Seizing stopped," a voice called out, "but she's not breathing right." "Secretions?" "Yeah, bad." "Keep giving atropine until they dry up. Don't stop. Pralidoxime takes longer to work, but we need it started. Where's that med?" "Pharmacy's sending it up." Emma finally looked up from the patient. Her hair had come loose from its tie. Her scrubs were soaked with sweat, but her hands were steady. Around the trauma bay, 5 people were down. 3 nurses. 1 security guard. 1 physician's assistant who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. All of them were being treated now. All of them were breathing. Barely. Pritchard stood against the far wall, staring at Emma like he'd never seen her before. She ignored him. "We need a perimeter," she said. "Nobody in or out without full decontamination. Soap and water, minimum 15 minutes. Clothes go in biohazard bags. Everything. And someone needs to contact—" The trauma bay doors opened. Everyone spun. A man stood in the entrance, 50s. Gray hair cut military short. Dark suit that screamed federal government. Behind him, 4 more people in hazmat suits. He looked at the scene, the collapsed staff, the frantic treatment, the sealed room, and then his eyes found Emma. "Who initiated containment protocol, so?" he asked. Emma straightened. "I did." His expression didn't change. "Name?" "Emma Reeves, RN." "How did you identify the exposure agent?" "Symptom presentation, speed of onset, secondary transmission pattern, the vial in his belongings." The man's jaw tightened. You opened his belongings, dumped them, didn't touch the vial. Smart. He pulled out a badge. Special Agent Marcus Webb, FBI Chemical Weapons Division. This hospital is now under federal quarantine. Nobody enters or exits without clearance. Is that understood? Pritchard finally found his voice. You can't just... I can. I am. And you're going to cooperate fully or you're going to be charged with obstruction in a federal terrorism investigation. Webb's eyes swept the room again. How many exposed? 5 critical. Unknown number of secondary exposures in the department, Emma said. Her voice was clinical now, detached. We shut down ventilation approximately 4 minutes after the patient arrived. The agent was likely airborne, but dispersal was limited. I've initiated atropine treatment for all symptomatic individuals. We need pralidoxime chloride for everyone exposed, and we need it 10 minutes ago. Webb nodded to someone behind him. They spoke into a radio. The patient? Webb asked. Emma glanced at the monitor. Coded twice. Currently in sinus rhythm, but unstable. Prognosis poor. Keep him alive. I'm trying. Webb stepped into the room fully. The hazmat-suited figures followed, immediately beginning to set up equipment Emma didn't recognize. How do you know this protocol? Nurse Reeves. Emma's hand stilled for just a fraction of a second. Previous experience. What kind of experience? The kind I'm not allowed to talk about. Something flickered in Webb's eyes. Understanding, maybe. Or suspicion. We're going to have a longer conversation later, he said. For now, keep doing what you're doing. My team will support. And someone... He turned to Pritchard. Someone explained to me how an ER nurse identified a chemical weapon attack faster than your entire medical staff. Pritchard opened his mouth, closed it. No sound came out. That's what I thought. Webb pulled out a phone, started making calls. Emma returned to the patient. His vitals were garbage, but improving incrementally. The atropine was working, slowly, too slowly. Without the pralidoxime, a hazmat-suited figure appeared at her elbow, holding an IV bag and a syringe. 2 p.a.m., the person said through the mask. Female voice. 1 gram IV push, then drip. Emma could have kissed her. She grabbed the medication, started administration. Around the trauma bay, the chaos was beginning to organize itself into something functional. The FBI team moved with practiced efficiency, setting up decontamination stations, collecting samples, cordoning off the area. But outside the trauma bay, through the windows, Emma could see people gathering, staff, patients, scared faces pressing against glass. We're going to have a panic, she said to Webb. Already happening. He didn't look up from his phone. Police are securing the perimeter. We've locked down the building. Nobody's told the media yet, but that's coming. How long until your team can decontaminate the wing? We're working on it. Not an answer. Emma didn't push. The patient's monitor showed improvement, heart rate stabilizing, oxygen saturation climbing, blood pressure still in the toilet, but better than flatline. He might make it, the respiratory therapist said quietly. Maybe. Emma checked the atropine drip. If we can keep his heart beating and his lungs working and his brain from swelling and his liver from failing, so basically if we perform a miracle. You don't believe in miracles? Emma's hand stilled on the IV pole. For a moment, just a flash. She was somewhere else. Somewhere hot. Somewhere loud. Somewhere people were screaming her name while fire lit up the night. Not anymore, she said. 2 hours crawled by. The patient stabilized. The exposed staff members all responded to treatment. Nobody else collapsed. The FBI team confirmed containment was holding. Emma worked through all of it, moving from patient to patient, checking vitals, adjusting medications, doing the 1,000 small tasks that kept people alive when their bodies wanted to quit. She didn't sit down, didn't eat, didn't stop. Around hour 3, Agent Webb approached her again. Nurse Reeves. She was checking on Jessica, the first nurse who'd collapsed. Young, scared, but breathing normally now, pupils reactive, talking in full sentences. Agent Webb. We need to talk about your background. Emma straightened. Do we? The Army has no record of an Emma Reeves serving in any medical capacity. Of course they didn't. The Army wouldn't, Emma said carefully. Webb's eyes narrowed. But someone would. She met his gaze, held it. That conversation requires clearance you probably don't have. Try me. Emma was saved from answering by a commotion at the trauma bay entrance. Raised voices. Someone demanding entry. Pritchard appeared, flanked by two hospital administrators Emma vaguely recognized. And behind them, her blood went cold. Three men in army dress uniforms. Officers, based on the insignia. The one in front had silver stars on his shoulders. A general. Emma's spine straightened automatically. Years of training, muscle memory that didn't care that she'd left that life behind. The general's eyes swept the trauma bay, taking in every detail with the kind of assessment that came from decades of command. Then his gaze landed on Emma. He went very, very still. "Captain," he said quietly. The trauma bay fell silent. Emma didn't move, didn't breathe. "It's just Nurse Reeves now, sir." The general, she could see his nameplate now, Wallace, walked toward her slowly, like approaching something dangerous. "I heard there was a chemical attack. I heard someone contained it before it became a mass casualty event. I thought—" He stopped 3 feet away. "I thought it couldn't possibly be you." Emma's jaw tightened. "Sir, you're supposed to be in Montana, working at some rural clinic. Disappeared. No forwarding address, no contact information. I wanted a quiet life." "Quiet." Wallace's laugh was bitter. "Is that what we're calling it?" Pritchard pushed forward. "Someone explain what's happening right now." Wallace didn't look at him. "This woman, this nurse you apparently tried to fire earlier today, is Captain Emma Reeves, former commander of the 274th Medical Detachment, Chemical Casualty Division. She spent 6 years in classified deployments across 3 continents, managing chemical and biological weapon exposure in combat zones. She's personally treated more nerve agent casualties than anyone else in the United States military, and she has more medals in her file than I have fingers." The silence was absolute. Emma felt every eye in the room burning into her. "That's classified, sir," she said quietly. "Not anymore." Wallace gestured to the scene around them. "You just saved this hospital. Again, like you always do, like you can't stop doing even when you're trying to hide." Pritchard's face had gone white. I didn't." "You didn't know," Wallace finished. "Nobody knows. Because Captain Reeves requested full anonymity when she separated from service. New identity, new credentials, fresh start, and the Army honored that request because of what she sacrificed for her country." Emma's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Sir, this isn't necessary." Wallace stepped closer. His voice dropped. "Emma, there are 3 more patients at different hospitals across the city showing the same symptoms. We've got a domestic chemical terrorism situation developing. The FBI is drowning, and you're the only person in a 5-state radius who has the experience to coordinate a response." "No. I'm not asking as a friend. We're not friends. I'm asking as someone who knows that if you don't help, people are going to die." Wallace's expression hardened. "And I know you. You can't walk away from that. You never could." Emma closed her eyes, breathed, opened them again. "I'm a civilian now," she said. "Then consult as a civilian. But we need you. The country needs you." She looked at the patient on the gurney, still alive, because of her, because she recognized what everyone else missed, because she couldn't turn off that part of her brain that saw patterns and calculated risks and knew exactly how many seconds stood between breathing and bleeding out. "Temporary," she said finally. "I help with this situation. Then I'm done." "Agreed." Emma turned to face Pritchard. The man looked like he'd been hit by a truck. "You're fired," she said flatly. "Consider this my resignation. Effective immediately." She started to walk past him. His hand shot out, grabbing her arm. "Wait, I didn't know. Emma looked down at his hand, then at his face. Something in her expression made him let go immediately. "You didn't want to know," she said quietly. "You saw a nurse who asked too many questions and challenged your authority, and you decided I was the problem. You didn't care about my credentials. You didn't care about my experience. You cared about power, about control, about making sure everyone knew you were in charge. I made a mistake. You made a choice." Emma's voice was flat. "And that choice almost cost lives today, so yes, I'm done here." She walked toward the exit. Wallace fell into step beside her. Agent Webb appeared in front of them. "Captain Reeves, just Emma. Emma, I need your full statement, and I need access to your service record." My service record is classified. I have clearance. Emma glanced at Wallace. He nodded. Fine. She was so tired. But later. Right now I need to brief your team on decontamination protocols for organophosphate compounds, and we need to identify the source of the exposure before more patients start showing up. Already working on it. The patient's belongings are being analyzed now. His phone, Emma said suddenly. Check his phone. If this was a targeted attack, there might be communication. If it was accidental exposure, there might be location data showing where he'd been. Webb pulled out his radio, relayed the information. They walked through the hospital corridors. Staff members stared as they passed. Word was spreading fast. The nurse everyone ignored. The woman Pritchard had tried to humiliate. She was military. She was decorated. She was something none of them had understood. Emma hated it. She'd left that life behind for a reason. She'd changed her name, moved across the country, taken a job where nobody knew her and nobody asked questions. She'd wanted normal. But normal didn't exist. Not for people like her. Not for people who'd seen what she'd seen. They reached a conference room that had been converted into a command center. Maps covered the walls. Phones rang constantly. People in suits and uniforms moved with purpose. Wallace guided her to a table where 3 other military officers waited. Gentlemen, Wallace said, this is Captain Emma Reeves. She'll be coordinating our medical response. The officers stood, saluted. Emma returned it automatically, muscle memory she couldn't suppress. At ease, and it's just Emma now. She studied the maps. 4 hospitals marked in red, Ridgemont General and 3 others scattered across the city. Same exposure agent at all locations? She asked. Preliminary tests suggest yes, but the source is still unknown. Emma's mind raced. 4 separate locations. Same agent. That wasn't accidental. That was deliberate, coordinated. Timeline? First patient presented at Ridgemont. That was yours. Second patient showed up at St. Catherine's 30 minutes later. Third and fourth within the hour. All male patients? Yes. Approximate age? 30s to 50s. Emma tapped the map. They're not the targets. They're the delivery system. Everyone looked at her. Explain, Wallace said. 4 men. 4 different hospitals. All presenting with the same exposure. Either they were all in the same place at the same time and got contaminated, or they were deliberately exposed to spread the agent to medical facilities. Bioterrorism, one of the officers said grimly. Maybe. Or a test run. Emma's finger traced lines between the hospitals. These facilities cover different parts of the city, different demographics, different emergency response capabilities. If someone wanted to see how the medical system would handle a chemical attack, they'd hit multiple targets simultaneously, Agent Webb finished. He'd followed them to the conference room. See which hospitals managed containment and which ones didn't. Exactly, Wallace swore quietly. Do we have IDs on the other patients? Working on it, but they all came in on buses or public transport. No personal vehicles, no known addresses. Homeless, Emma said. Or transient, people nobody would miss immediately. The room went quiet. That's dark, someone said. That's tactical. Emma's voice was flat. You want to test a chemical weapon's effectiveness on a civilian target? You use subjects who won't be immediately connected to each other. You spread them across multiple locations to test response times and containment procedures. And you pick a city big enough to have infrastructure but small enough to overwhelm emergency services. Wallace studied her. You've thought about this before. I've responded to this before. Emma's eyes stayed on the map. Different country, different circumstances. But the pattern's the same. Her phone buzzed. She'd forgotten she even had it. The screen showed 3 missed calls and a text from Travis, the paramedic. They're shutting down the ER, full quarantine. Everyone's freaking out. Emma showed Wallace the message. Expected, he said. All 4 hospitals are under federal quarantine until we can confirm containment. That's going to cause problems. You shut down 4 major emergency departments. Where do people go when they're hurt? We're setting up field hospitals. How fast? Working on it. Not fast enough. Never fast enough. Emma's head throbbed. She needed coffee, sleep, a shower, things she wasn't going to get. I need full access to all patient records, she said. Yours, the FBI's, everyone's. I need to see symptom progression, treatment responses, everything. If there's a pattern, I'll find it. Done. Wallace nodded to one of the officers, who immediately started making calls. Agent Webb stepped closer. There's something else you should know. Emma waited. The vial we recovered from your patient? It's empty, but the residue inside matches a compound that hasn't been manufactured in the United States in 20 years. Russian? Close. Former Soviet stockpile. The kind that was supposed to be destroyed after the Chemical Weapons Convention. Emma's blood ran cold. Someone's using Cold War surplus. Or recreating it. We won't know until the lab finishes analysis. How long? Hours? Maybe a day. Too long. Way too long. Emma turned back to the map. 4 hospitals. 4 patients. Unknown number of exposed civilians. And somewhere out there, someone who'd just launched a chemical attack on American soil. She pulled out a chair, sat down for the first time in what felt like days. Okay, she said quietly. Let's figure out who's trying to kill people and how to stop them before they try again. Wallace placed a hand on her shoulder. Glad you're back, Captain. She wasn't, but she didn't say that. Outside the conference room windows, evening was falling. The city lights were starting to glow. Somewhere out there, people were going about their normal lives, eating dinner, watching TV, completely unaware that their hospital system was under siege. Emma envied them. She'd wanted normal. She'd wanted quiet. She'd wanted to forget what it felt like to make life or death decisions while chaos screamed around her. But here she was again, back in the fire. The only difference was this time, she wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wearing scrubs. And the battlefield wasn't overseas. It was home. The conference room transformed into something resembling a war room around midnight. 3 monitors displayed real-time data from the 4 hospitals. Red dots marked patient locations. Yellow highlighted exposure zones. Blue traced the movements of federal agents now canvassing the city for any leads on the attack's origin. Emma hadn't left her chair in 6 hours. Coffee cups accumulated on the table beside her. Her scrubs were still stained with the first patient's blood. She'd stopped noticing the discomfort around hour 3. Agent Webb was on his 4th call with the lab. His voice had taken on that particular edge that came from hearing bad news repeatedly. I don't care if the equipment needs recalibration, he was saying. Run it again. I need those compound results within the next 2 hours. He hung up, looked at Emma. Still waiting, she said before he could ask. The second patient at St. Catherine's just coded, one of the junior agents reported from across the room. They got him back, but his kidney function is shutting down. Emma closed her eyes. The organophosphate compounds attacked multiple systems simultaneously. Heart, lungs, kidneys, nervous system. You could treat the symptoms all day and still lose them to cascade failure if the exposure had been heavy enough. How long was he exposed before medical intervention? She asked. Unknown. Found on the number 7 bus when it reached the downtown terminal. Driver called paramedics immediately. So at least 20 minutes unmanaged, minimum. Wallace approached, holding a tablet. His uniform looked rumpled now, jacket discarded, tie loosened. The general had been in the field long enough to understand that formality was a luxury during active operations. We've got identities on 3 of the 4 patients, he said. Emma opened her eyes. And? No connection. Nothing linking them. Different neighborhoods, different employment histories. 2 had priors for minor offenses. 1 was completely clean. Nothing suggesting they were targets or knew each other. Which one was clean? The one from Ridgemont. Your first patient, Marcus Webb. Ironically enough, no relation to our agent here. Emma's attention sharpened. First name or last? First. Marcus Chen Webb. 42. Worked in construction. Divorced. Lived alone. Nobody filed a missing person report because nobody noticed he was gone until the paramedics found him. The name hit her wrong. Chen. She'd heard that name before in contexts she'd been deliberately trying to forget. But the face. She needed to see the face. Pull his hospital records, any identification photos. Wallace tapped the tablet. A driver's license appeared on one of the monitors. Emma stood, walked to the screen, stared at it. The man looking back at her was someone she'd seen before. Not in person. In a file. Classified file. Deep enough that she wasn't supposed to remember the details anymore. He's military, she said quietly. Every head in the room turned. What? Webb stepped forward. We ran background checks. Came back clean. Because he's using a cover identity. Emma couldn't look away from the photo. That face? I've seen it before. Different name in my file, different history, but same person. Wallace's jaw tightened. Are you certain? No, not certain, but close enough to be worth investigating. Webb was already on his phone, barking orders to have Marcus Chen Webb's background run through every classified database the federal government maintained, which meant waiting. Waiting for calls to be made, for systems to be accessed, for bureaucracy to move at bureaucratic speed while people were dying in hospitals. Emma returned to her chair. Her leg bounced, nervous energy, exhaustion, too much coffee and not enough sleep. If your patient is military, Webb said carefully, that changes the entire operational profile. It does if he was targeted because of his identity, but if he's just being used as a vector, then someone knew he'd be on that bus at that specific time, Wallace finished, which means surveillance, which means planning. The room descended into controlled chaos. New calls were made, new databases searched. The three agents who'd been monitoring hospital records suddenly had something concrete to chase. Emma watched the activity without really seeing it. Her mind was already moving ahead, calculating probabilities, considering scenarios. A woman in FBI field gear entered the room carrying a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a bus pass, a wallet, and a collection of small items that had been in Marcus Chen Webb's pockets. Found at his point of collection, the woman said. He'd been dead about 3 hours before discovery. Dead? Emma looked up sharply. He was alive when he came to Ridgemont. We know. But the lab analysis suggests he was exposed to a significantly higher concentration than the other 3 patients. Lower body weight despite being middle-aged. Less developed tolerance to organophosphate compounds. The vector we recovered from his belongings had heavy residue, more than the containers we found with patients 2 and 3. So he wasn't just exposed, he was intentionally dosed heavily. Emma's stomach turned. Show me the vial, she said. The agent hesitated. Webb nodded. She pulled out another evidence bag, displaying a small glass container. Even sealed, Emma could see the faint discoloration inside. That's not a full vial, Emma said. That's a partial. Someone drew from a larger supply. Meaning there's more of the compound somewhere, Webb said grimly. And meaning someone knows how to safely handle it. This isn't a suicide bomber. This is someone trained in chemical weapons handling. Wallace looked at the ceiling for a moment, a gesture that meant he was about to say something nobody wanted to hear. We need to consider the possibility that someone inside the military community has gone rogue. The room went quiet. That's a serious accusation, one of the officers said carefully. It's a serious situation. Wallace's voice was flat. Classified compound from Soviet stockpiles, military-grade preparation, coordinated multi-location deployment, and now a patient with a classified military background being used as a primary vector. That's not a coincidence. That's infrastructure. Emma's hands curled into fists. She'd trained with enough people over the years to know that the possibility of betrayal from within was always there. Soldiers went rogue, officers disappeared, the system had cracks. But chemical weapons on American soil? That was different. That was something else entirely. We need to access the classified files, she said. Anything connected to Marcus Chen Webb, the compound being used, and any military operations involving domestic deployment of chemical agents. That's beyond my clearance, Webb said. It's not beyond mine, Wallace replied, but I need authorization from the Joint Chiefs. Get it. Wallace walked out of the room, phone already in hand. The remaining people looked at each other with the particular exhaustion that came from realizing a situation had just become exponentially worse. Emma stood, walked to the window. Outside, the city was sleeping. People in their beds had no idea that their hospital system was compromised. No idea that someone had just conducted what amounted to a live test of a chemical weapon. No idea it was about to get worse. Her phone buzzed. Travis, the paramedic, texting again. Hospitals are saying this might last 72 hours. They're setting up backup protocols. Are you okay? She stared at the message for a long time before responding. Fine. Working on it. A lie. She wasn't fine. She was about 3 coffee cups away from her hand shaking, and about 1 more revelation away from her carefully constructed new life shattering completely. Agent Webb appeared at her shoulder. You okay? No. At least that was honest. For what it's worth, Webb said, your identification of the military background on that patient probably just saved lives. If we can figure out why he was targeted, we might be able to prevent the next attack. There won't be a next attack, Emma said quietly. How can you be sure? Because this wasn't an attack. This was a message. She turned to face him. 4 patients, 4 hospitals, all exposed to the same compound, all presenting within an hour of each other. Someone wanted to demonstrate capability, that they can deploy a chemical weapon in a major American city and that the medical system can't stop it. That's not terrorism. That's a demonstration. Demonstration to who? Someone in government who's supposed to be watching for exactly this scenario. Someone who ignored the warning signs. Someone who's going to have to explain why chemical weapons attacks weren't prevented. Webb's face went pale. You think this is political? I think this is someone with access, training, and specific knowledge of how to exploit system vulnerabilities. That's not a random actor. That's someone inside. Before Webb could respond, Wallace reappeared. His expression had gone completely blank, which was somehow worse than anger. We have clearance, he said quietly. And Emma, we need to talk. Privately. They found an empty office on the 2nd floor of the hospital. Wallace closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it like he needed the support. The classified file on Marcus Chen Webb doesn't exist, he said. Emma's stomach dropped. What? Doesn't exist. It's been deleted, completely purged from the system. No records, no backup, nothing. That's impossible. Files at that level of classification don't just... They do if someone with administrative access wants them gone. Wallace ran a hand over his face. Emma, I've been in the military for 34 years. I've never seen anything like this. Someone just erased a man's entire military history. They targeted him with a chemical weapon, and now they're trying to bury it. Emma's mind raced. A purged file meant someone with seriously high-level access, someone who understood classified systems, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. What about the compound? She asked. Being analyzed, but the preliminary results are concerning. How concerning? The compound isn't from Soviet stockpiles. It's new, recent synthesis. Someone in the last year manufactured it. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Emma's feet. That's a current threat, she whispered. That's an active weapons program operating inside the United States that nobody knew about until tonight, Wallace corrected. And it's being run by someone with military credentials and access to classified systems. The other 3 patients, being compared to Marcus now. If they have military backgrounds, we might be able to find a connection. If they don't, then Marcus was the priority target, and the other 3 were either misdirection or confirmation tests. Wallace nodded grimly. Emma moved to the window. Her reflection stared back at her, hollow-eyed and exhausted. She looked like someone who'd been running for days. She felt like someone who'd just realized the finish line didn't exist. I need to see Marcus Chen Webb, she said. He's still in the ICU. Critical condition. I need to see him before he dies. If he has military background in his file, there might be something in his medical history that connects to his service, something in his physical condition, a detail that explains why he was chosen. He's unconscious. Then I'll be looking at data, not having a conversation. Wallace considered this, then pulled out his phone and made arrangements. 20 minutes later, Emma stood in the ICU isolation room wearing full protective gear. The environment was entirely sealed, entirely sterile, entirely designed to prevent the very contamination that had already killed most of this man's organs. Marcus Chen Webb looked smaller than his driver's license suggested. Hospital gowns did that, made everyone look diminished, vulnerable. His skin had a grayish tint that spoke of failing circulation. His chest rose and fell with the mechanical assistance of a ventilator, each breath forced, mechanical, lacking any vitality. She checked his medical history on the chart. Construction worker. No mention of military service in the civilian records. No medical history suggesting chemical exposure. No indicators that he'd been anything other than an ordinary man living an ordinary life. But someone had found him. Someone had targeted him specifically. Someone knew he'd be on that bus at that specific time. Emma pulled up the hospital's trauma imaging. CT scans of his lungs, brain, organs. The chemical exposure had done extensive damage, but what caught her attention was something else entirely. Scarring in the lungs. Old scarring, the kind that came from previous exposure to irritants or toxins. Not severe enough to cause symptoms, not visible on a casual examination, but definitely there if you knew how to look. She pulled up the lab results on the ventilator readings. Trace compounds in his bloodstream besides the organophosphate. Things that didn't belong. Things that suggested chronic low-level exposure to something over an extended period. Someone had been poisoning Marcus Chen Webb for months, and tonight's attack wasn't the first time. It was just the final time. Emma's hand steadied as she processed that realization. This wasn't random. This wasn't a test. This was an execution. Someone had systematically weakened this man's system over months and then deployed the chemical weapon knowing his already compromised body wouldn't be able to survive it. She stepped out of the isolation room, stripped off the protective gear, and found Wallace in the hallway. "He was already dying," she said quietly. "Someone's been poisoning him for months. This attack was just the finishing blow." Wallace's face went hard. "You're certain? The scarring in his lungs, the trace compounds, yes. Someone wanted him dead, and they wanted to make sure the chemical weapon would finish what slow poisoning couldn't. Why? Why poison someone slowly if you're just going to attack him with a chemical weapon?" Because slow poisoning leaves questions. Autopsy results that don't match the narrative. Chemical weapon attack leaves clear evidence. Everyone knows what killed him. It's obvious. It's undeniable. But the slow poisoning first? That could be passed off as occupational exposure. Construction hazard. Nothing suspicious. Wallace stared at her like she was speaking a language he didn't understand. Maybe she was. Maybe she'd been in this world too long. The world where people were systematically eliminated through perfectly calculated combinations of methods. "I need to talk to the other 3 patients," Emma said. "They need blood work for chronic exposure markers. They need lung imaging. They need—" Her phone buzzed. "Agent Webb. 2 more patients just arrived. St. James across town. Same symptoms. They're arriving now." Emma closed her eyes. 6 total, she said quietly. "What?" "This was never just 4. There are 6 patients total now, which means—" "There could be more coming," Wallace finished. He was already moving. "We need to expand the quarantine." They moved quickly back to the command center. The mood had shifted. What had been controlled crisis management had transformed into something darker, more urgent, more desperate. Webb was on multiple calls simultaneously, his jaw clenched, his voice sharp with commands that weren't being obeyed fast enough. The new patients at St. James had arrived within an hour of each other. Both male, both middle-aged, both unconscious on arrival. Both with the same presentation as Marcus Chen Webb. "Get me their backgrounds," Webb ordered. "Military status, employment history, everything. And I want comparison analysis on all 6 patients within the hour." Emma pulled up the files as they came through. The new patients weren't military, at least not officially, but they had something else in common. They all worked in security, industrial security, government facility security, the kind of positions that required background checks and security clearances. "They're targets of opportunity," Emma said, more to herself than anyone else. Wallace turned to her. "What?" "Someone's systematically targeting people with security clearance, people with access to protected facilities, people who would have information about vulnerable systems." "That's espionage," one of the officers said. "That's worse than espionage, that's collection." Emma's finger traced the connections on the tablet. Someone's not just trying to steal information, they're trying to eliminate the people who have it. They're creating a gap in knowledge, a window where information about vulnerabilities exists, but the people who know about them are dead. Webb's face had gone ashen. How many people work in security with government facility access in this city? Nobody answered immediately because nobody wanted to do the math. "Thousands," an agent finally said quietly. "Minimum 3,000, maybe more. So if someone's targeting them systematically, we're looking at a death toll in the hundreds," Emma finished, "possibly more. And we have no way to warn them without creating panic that could cause collateral casualties." The room seemed to shrink suddenly, the walls pressing closer, the air getting thinner. "We need to get ahead of this," Wallace said, but he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "We need to predict the next locations, the next targets." "We can't," Emma said flatly, "because we're looking at this wrong. We're treating it like a terrorism event. But it's not. It's a purge." Silence. Someone inside government, she continued, her voice steady despite the ice running through her veins, is eliminating people who know something, something they don't want known, something they need buried before it becomes public. That's a conspiracy theory, someone said weakly. No, Emma replied. It's pattern recognition, and I'm very good at pattern recognition. Agent Webb was already dialing. I'm calling the director. This goes beyond FBI protocol. His phone went dead. All the phones went dead. The monitors flickered, then went black. Emergency lights kicked in, bathing the room in red. An alarm screamed through the hospital, and outside through the windows, everyone could see it. Emergency vehicles, military vehicles, all converging on Ridgemont General Hospital. But they weren't arriving to help. They were surrounding the building, completely, cutting off every exit, creating a perimeter. Someone had just locked them all inside. And Emma realized with terrible clarity exactly what that meant. They'd found what someone didn't want found. And now someone very powerful was making sure they never told anyone about it. The red emergency lights created a strobe effect that made movement look fractured, unreal. Emma's vision snapped between the darkened monitors, the armed personnel now visible through the windows, and Wallace's face, which had gone the color of old concrete. That's military hardware, one of the officers said. His voice shook. Those are Army vehicles. Whose Army? Webb's question hung in the air like a bullet nobody wanted to catch. Emma was already moving, not toward the exits, toward the secure server room 2 floors down, the one she'd noticed during her initial walkthrough of the command center, the one that had its own power supply and redundant communications. Where are you going? Wallace called after her. Getting us out of this. She didn't slow down. You need to start documenting everything, every file, every photo, every piece of data about those 6 patients. Because whoever just locked this building is about to try to make it all disappear. She took the stairs instead of the elevator, faster, less predictable, safer if someone was already monitoring building systems. The hospital had gone quiet in that particular way that happened when something catastrophic was happening. Staff members stood frozen in hallways, phones dead in their hands, staring at emergency lights that offered no explanation. The server room was in the basement, behind a locked door that required keycard access. Emma didn't have a keycard. She did have 6 years of tactical training that included bypassing security systems in hostile environments. The lock was civilian grade. She had it open in 90 seconds using techniques that involved a security credential she'd lifted from an unattended desk upstairs and a piece of wire from an emergency medical kit. The server room hummed with the sound of redundant systems, backup generators already cycling online. The hospital's communications infrastructure, completely separate from the main network that had just been compromised. She pulled out her phone, still dead. But the emergency phones in the server room, the ones hardwired directly into independent systems, those would work. She grabbed one, dialed the number she'd memorized years ago but never expected to use, the kind of number that only existed in secure military databases and the minds of people like her who'd been trained to call it during emergencies. 3 rings. Then a voice she almost didn't recognize because she hadn't heard it in 4 years. This line is monitored. I know. I need to reach Director Carlisle at DOD. It's emergency priority alpha. Silence. Then, who is this? Captain Emma Reeves. File number Bravo 729er Echo. I'm calling from Ridgemont General Hospital. We have a Code Omega situation. Code Omega. The only code higher than emergency. The code that meant national security catastrophe and active development. Please hold. The line went to dead air. Emma waited, her jaw clenched, her mind running through scenarios. Whoever had locked down Ridgemont General wasn't doing it to contain a chemical weapons situation. They were doing it to contain information, to silence witnesses, to eliminate the people who knew too much, which meant they'd already figured out that someone in that command center had started connecting the dots. 2 minutes later, a different voice came on the line. Older, authoritative in a way that suggested the person had spent decades wielding power and never questioned whether they should. This is Director Carlisle. Identify yourself. Captain Emma Reeves, former commander of the 274th Medical Detachment. I'm currently at Ridgemont General Hospital, where we've had 6 chemical exposure patients with evidence of targeted assassination via chronic poisoning, followed by acute chemical weapon deployment. The hospital is currently surrounded by armed military personnel, and communications have been jammed. Carlisle's breath caught, just barely, but Emma heard it. "Stand by," he said. Another silence. Longer this time. 30 seconds. 40. 60. Long enough that Emma started considering which exit routes from the server room would be least likely to be covered if things went hostile. "Captain Reeves," Carlisle's voice came back, "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to answer it with complete honesty. Have you accessed any classified files tonight?" "No. The classified files on one of the patients have been deleted from all accessible systems." "Good. Don't access any. Don't attempt to retrieve them. Don't discuss what you suspect they contained. Can you do that?" "With respect, sir, someone's trying to eliminate witnesses to a military operation being conducted on American soil. I'm not sure I can do that." "You can, and you will." Carlisle's voice had gone hard. "Because you're currently in a building that's about to be completely isolated. No communications, no outside contact. And within the next hour, someone's going to walk in and ask you some very specific questions about what you've learned tonight. Your answer to those questions will determine whether you leave that hospital alive." Emma's stomach dropped. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that the situation you've stumbled into is above both our pay grades. I'm saying that there are operations running inside this government that I can't officially acknowledge exist. And I'm saying that if you want to live to see tomorrow, you need to play dead. You need to act like you haven't figured out what's happening. You need to be the nurse who stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time and got lucky, nothing more." That's how you survive, Captain. Your military training should be telling you that. You're outgunned, outpositioned, and facing an opponent with institutional authority. Your only advantage is that they don't know how much you actually know. Use that." He was right. Emma hated it, but he was right. Tactical assessment suggested immediate combat would result in her death. Retreat to a prepared position and wait for backup was the correct play. But retreat meant abandoning Wallace, meant abandoning Webb, meant watching whatever was about to happen unfold without trying to stop it. "Sir, there are 6 patients in medical crisis. They need treatment. If the hospital's locked down, the patients will be evacuated. Medical teams are being mobilized. You focus on survival. That's an order, Captain. I'm not military anymore. You're military until I release you from active duty, which isn't happening today." Carlisle's voice softened fractionally. "I know this isn't what you signed up for. I know you wanted normal, but normal's not an option right now. Stay alive, stay quiet. Let this play out. And when this is over, I'll make sure nobody ever bothers you again." The line went dead. Emma sat in the server room, surrounded by the hum of backup systems, and felt something crystallize inside her. Not hope. Not exactly resignation either. Something colder and more pragmatic. Survival first, justice later. She left the server room carefully, checking hallways before moving. The hospital had devolved into controlled chaos. Staff moving between rooms in what looked like organized evacuation protocols, despite the lack of verbal communication. Someone had gotten word out. Someone in the hospital administration, probably. Information traveling through hand signals and writing on whiteboards. Old-school communication that didn't require functioning technology. She made it back to the command center. Wallace was organizing files into a banker's box. Hard copies of everything that wouldn't be captured by digital systems if those systems got wiped. Webb stood by the window, watching the armed personnel consolidate their positions around the hospital perimeter. "We've got about 30 minutes before someone comes through that door," Webb said quietly when he noticed Emma. "Hospital administration got word that we need to evacuate the patients. They're starting transfer protocols." "Where are they being moved?" "Federal medical facility, black site, somewhere I don't have clearance to know about." Webb's laugh was bitter, which tells you everything you need to know about what's happening here. "How many people know what we've figured out?" Emma asked carefully. "That we're looking at a systematic assassination program targeting people with security clearance?" Wallace looked up from the files. "Just us. And whoever locked this building, which means they either knew we'd figure it out or they're making sure we don't tell anyone." Emma chose her words carefully. "We need to consider the possibility that we're wrong, that we're connecting dots that don't actually connect. Pattern matching when there's no actual pattern. Webb's eyes narrowed. He was smart enough to recognize a shift in tactical positioning when he heard one. Wallace, though, he just looked at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. "We're not wrong," he said, "but we can't prove it. Not anymore. The classified files have been deleted. The physical evidence is controlled by federal agencies. Any accusation we make is going to sound like conspiracy theory from people who are too close to an emergency situation." She could see the moment Wallace understood what she was doing. His expression changed. Not approval. He wasn't stupid enough to think this was a good solution. But recognition. He understood she was being tactical about survival. "So what are you suggesting?" he asked carefully. "That we cooperate. That we let whoever comes through that door take what they want. That we don't fight. Because fighting gets us killed. And dead people don't get to see justice." It tasted like poison in her mouth, but it was tactically sound. Webb moved away from the window. "That's not... It's the play," Emma said flatly. "It's the only play that keeps us alive long enough to do something about this later." The alarms cut off. Emergency lights switched to standard illumination, and the doors to the command center opened. 2 officers walked in. Both colonels. Both wearing the kind of expression that suggested they'd done this before and weren't particularly troubled by it. "I'm Colonel Bridges," the taller one said. "This is Colonel Martinez. We're here to secure all materials related to the chemical exposure incident and transport you to a secure debriefing facility." "We're cooperating," Wallace said immediately. "All materials, all files, everything's here. We're ready to assist with whatever you need." Bridges' eyes tracked across the room, took in the banker's box of hard copies, the empty chairs where analysts had been working, the tension that hung in the air like humidity. "You'll need to come with us," Bridges said. "All of us?" Webb sounded remarkably calm for someone who was being escorted out of a hospital by armed military officers. "Dr. Webb, Agent Webb, your transportation to a facility in Maryland. Captain Reeves and General Wallace need to come with Colonel Martinez and myself." Something in Emma's chest went tight, separating them. Standard interrogation protocol. Keep witnesses isolated so their stories don't align. Get them in separate rooms and see what contradictions emerged. "I'm walking out of here on my own terms or not at all," Emma said quietly. Bridges turned to look at her, really look at her. Took in the stains on her scrubs, the wild hair, the hollow eyes of someone who'd been running on fumes for too long. "You don't have that option, Captain." "Everyone has options." Emma's voice stayed level. "You can take us by force. That's one option. Or you can let me walk out of here voluntarily, which is faster and cleaner and doesn't create the kind of incident that gets reported to oversight committees." "Is that a threat?" "That's an observation." Emma stepped forward. "You're here because someone important wants this situation contained quietly. Quietly doesn't include military personnel forcibly removing a decorated officer from a hospital full of civilian witnesses. That creates paperwork, creates questions, creates the kind of thing that ends up in Inspector General reports." Martinez shifted slightly, a move that suggested she was reconsidering something. "The captain makes a point," Martinez said quietly to Bridges. "We were authorized for secure transport, not forced removal." Bridges didn't like it, but he nodded. "Come with us. Voluntarily. And we won't need to make this complicated." Emma grabbed her jacket, looked at Wallace and Webb in turn. "I'll see you both on the other side," she said. It was a promise and a prayer and a threat all at once. The ride took 2 hours and followed a route that seemed deliberately circuitous. They drove through the city, then out toward the mountains, then through switchbacks that made Emma's injured back scream in protest. She kept her eyes on the landscape, memorizing landmarks, building a map in her head. Military training. Always know the exit route. Always know where you are. They arrived at a facility that wasn't on any map Emma had ever seen. Concrete walls, armed gates. The kind of place that existed in the space between official and unofficial. Martinez and Bridges separated her from Wallace immediately. Different interrogation rooms, different officers asking questions. The officer assigned to her was someone in his 60s named Garrison. Military bearing despite being civilian, which meant retired military now working private sector security consulting. The kind of person who understood discipline and protocol and the importance of not asking too many questions about operations. He put a cup of coffee in front of her, a plate of sandwiches, treated her like a guest rather than a prisoner, which was somehow worse than the alternative. "We need to walk through the night's events," Garrison said mildly. Everything you observed, everything you analyzed, everything you concluded. Emma told him. All of it. But she left out the crucial parts, left out Carlyle, left out Code Omega, left out the specific analysis that had convinced her someone was systematically eliminating witnesses. Instead, she presented it as medical observation, chemical exposure response, standard emergency protocols. Garrison listened without interrupting. His expression never changed. When she finished, he set down his pen and sipped his coffee. That's a very clean narrative, Captain. Very orderly. Very lacking in the kind of conspiratorial thinking that leads to problematic conclusions. I'm a nurse, not a conspiracy theorist. You're a combat medic. There's a difference. Garrison's eyes were very still. Combat medics see patterns, see connections, see the ways that events align in ways that statistical probability says shouldn't happen. So I'm going to ask you directly. What do you think is actually happening? Emma chose her words carefully. I think someone exposed 6 people to a chemical weapon. I think those 6 people had something in common that made them targets. I think someone doesn't want that commonality investigated. And what is that commonality? Military background, or military-adjacent employment, which suggests someone is conducting a purge of people with sensitive information. Garrison nodded like she'd just confirmed something he already knew. That's what I thought you'd concluded, he said. The question is what you're going to do about it. He stood, walked to the window. Outside, the facility was quiet, mountains visible in the distance, the kind of place where people disappeared and nobody asked questions. I can't do anything about it, Emma said. I'm a civilian now. I don't have access to classified systems. I don't have authority to investigate military operations. I can tell people what I suspect, but without evidence, it's just the ravings of a conspiracy theorist. Exactly right. Garrison turned back to her. Which is why you're going to go back to your quiet life. You're going to take a different job in a different city. You're going to rebuild the anonymity you've worked so hard to construct, and you're going to forget tonight ever happened. And if I don't, then you'll spend the next several years being debriefed in secure locations by people who are much less polite than I am. Your former commander will face charges. Agent Webb will disappear. The patients you tried to help will die in hospitals that never existed. And you'll spend your remaining years wondering if any of it was real or if you imagined the whole thing. The room seemed to shrink. Emma's hands curled into fists beneath the table. She wanted to argue, wanted to fight, wanted to do literally anything except accept this scenario and walk away. But Garrison was right. She was outgunned, outpositioned, facing an opponent with institutional authority that extended beyond what she could comprehend. How long do I have to decide? She asked quietly. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, the decisions get made for you. They kept her in a cell that was decorated to look like a hotel room. Bed, bathroom, television that only received one channel showing a loop of news programs. The kind of place that was designed to minimize psychological stress while still making clear she was a prisoner. Emma sat on the bed and thought about survival. She thought about Marcus Chen Webb, who'd been systematically poisoned by someone with access and authority. She thought about the other 5 patients, who'd probably received the same treatment. She thought about Wallace and Webb and all the people who tried to do the right thing and were now paying the price for it. She thought about Carlyle's voice on that phone line, the way he'd told her to play dead, the implication that there were operations running inside government that extended into territory nobody wanted examined. And she thought about the military bracelet she'd hidden beneath her sleeve for years, the symbol of wars she'd fought and people she'd tried to save, and the moment she'd decided that survival meant escape. She couldn't escape this. She'd tried, and the world had followed her anyway. So instead, she decided to stop running. The decision came with perfect clarity at about 3 a.m. Emma stood, walked to the door, and pressed the call button. An officer appeared within minutes. Young, nervous, definitely not expecting anything from the prisoner in the detainment room. I want to speak to Director Carlyle, Emma said. Tell him it's Captain Reeves, and I want to invoke my active duty status to request a direct briefing from the chain of command. The officer hesitated. I'm not sure. Make sure. Tell him Captain Reeves is invoking Military Code Section 1247, which allows active duty personnel to request escalation of command authority during national security incidents. She'd made up the code section, didn't exist, but it sounded official enough that the officer didn't question it. 30 minutes later, Garrison returned. He looked significantly less polite than before. "You've created a complication," he said. "No. I've clarified my position. I'm invoking active duty status to bypass your interrogation protocol." "You separated from service." "I separated from active duty station assignment. I never formally separated from military service. That requires paperwork through the Joint Chiefs, which I never filed. So technically, I'm still military, still subject to military code of justice, still eligible to invoke command authority escalation." Garrison's expression was ice. "You realize you're making this worse. For yourself, for General Wallace, for everyone involved." "I realize I'm making it official, which means it can't be disappeared into black sites and classified files, which means it becomes a matter of legal record." "You think that protects you?" "I think it protects the truth. And I think you're going to have to call Director Carlisle because he's the only person in this chain of command with authority to override my status." Garrison stared at her for a long moment, then walked out without responding. The cell door locked behind him with a sound like finality. Emma lay on the bed and waited. Hours crawled by. She counted them by the way the light changed through the small window, measured them by her heartbeat when she couldn't think about anything else. She'd committed to a path now. No walking it back, no retreating into safety. Whatever happened next would happen, and she'd face it conscious and defiant rather than compliant and broken. Around dawn, the door opened again. But it wasn't Garrison. It was someone in full military dress uniform. Colonel. Face she didn't recognize, but bearing that suggested someone who'd spent decades in specialized operations. "Captain Reeves," the colonel said, "I'm Colonel Sarah Chen. I've been authorized to inform you that your status has been escalated to the Joint Chiefs level. You're being transferred to a secure facility where you'll provide a full debriefing on the chemical exposure incident, the data you collected, and your analysis of the operational framework you believe is being conducted. And General Wallace will be debriefed separately. Agent Webb has been released to FBI custody pending their own investigation." Emma stood, waited. "There's one more thing," Colonel Chen continued. "Director Carlisle has authorized me to inform you that the 6 patients exposed to the chemical weapon are receiving treatment at a federal medical facility. All 6 are currently stable. All 6 are under protective custody." She didn't say it, but the meaning was clear. The patients were alive because Emma had identified them quickly enough. And they were safe because someone, Carlisle or someone above Carlisle, had decided their survival was worth defending. "What about Ridgemont General?" Emma asked. "Hospital administration is being reviewed. The chief medical officer, Jonathan Pritchard, has been suspended pending investigation into negligence and falsification of emergency records. Several other staff members are also being reviewed." Emma almost smiled. Not quite, but close. "So we're moving forward." "We're moving forward carefully," Colonel Chen corrected. "In ways that preserve institutional continuity while addressing systemic failures. That's how these situations are actually resolved. Not with dramatic accusations and public trials, with quiet reorganization, with people losing their positions, with quiet justice that nobody sees but everyone understands." It wasn't the ending Emma would have written. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't satisfying. But it was better than nothing. They walked out of the cell together, through corridors Emma had never seen, past rooms with doors that had no labels, past people who looked away when she passed, careful not to acknowledge her existence. The vehicle waiting outside was a military transport. Black, unmarked. The kind of thing that moved through the world without drawing attention. As Emma climbed inside, she looked back at the facility one last time. Concrete walls, armed gates, a place that officially didn't exist. She'd been right about one thing. Someone in government had been conducting operations that nobody wanted examined. Someone had been eliminating witnesses. Someone had been hiding weapons programs and classified assassinations beneath layers of institutional authority. But she'd also been wrong about something. It wasn't one person. It was an entire system, an entire infrastructure built to protect power at any cost. And that system had just realized it had created something it couldn't control. The vehicle started moving toward the mountains, toward wherever this was actually heading. Emma sat in the darkness of the transport compartment and waited to find out what happened when you stopped running and started fighting back. Because she'd made a decision in that detainment cell that changed everything. She wasn't going to cooperate with quiet solutions. She wasn't going to disappear into anonymity, and she wasn't going to let the system that had tried to silence her walk away unscathed. The transport hit a pothole and lurched. In that moment, Emma felt something shift inside her. Not fear. Not exactly. Purpose. The kind of purpose that came from finally accepting you were never going to get normal, and deciding to burn down everything that stood in the way of the truth instead. The Joint Chief facility in Arlington was buried underground in a way that suggested someone had spent considerable money ensuring it remained invisible to satellite imagery. Colonel Chen escorted Emma through corridors lined with faces of military leadership dating back decades. The photos transitioned from color to black and white as they went deeper, a timeline of command authority stretching back to an era when wars were still fought with conventional weapons and conventional rules. They stopped outside a conference room with no identifying markers. "Director Carlyle is waiting," Chen said. "And Captain Reeves, they're going to try to convince you that cooperation means silence, that protecting national security means accepting institutional failures. I want you to understand that you have leverage now. You've invoked your status. You've forced escalation. Use that." Emma nodded, walked through the door. Carlyle was older in person than his voice had suggested. 70s, maybe. The kind of old that came from decades of making decisions that affected millions of people. He sat alone at a table laden with files, coffee, and the particular exhaustion that suggested he hadn't slept in approximately 3 days. "Captain Reeves." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Thank you for the direct approach. It's refreshing, actually. Most people try to navigate bureaucratic channels when they're cornered. You just invoke statute and force the issue." Emma sat. Didn't offer anything conversational. "I suppose you want an explanation," Carlyle continued. "I want the truth. The truth is complicated." Carlyle pulled up a file on the tablet between them. Images appeared. Chemical compounds, military facility schematics, personnel rosters with faces blurred and redacted. 30 years ago, when the Soviet Union collapsed, a significant quantity of chemical weapons was supposed to be destroyed under international treaty. Most of it was, but some of it wasn't, because some people inside the Russian government and some people inside our government realized that weapons like that shouldn't go to waste. Emma's hands curled into fists. "A black market emerged," Carlyle continued. "Unofficial channels, people trading in stockpiles nobody was supposed to have. And approximately 8 years ago, someone inside the American military bought a quantity of organophosphate compounds for a price that would make your head spin." "Who?" "That's where this becomes complicated." Carlyle pulled up more files, personnel records, budget allocations, meeting transcripts marked with classification levels that made Emma's eyes water. The purchase was made through intermediaries, off-books funding, the kind of operation that lives in the cracks between official budgets and plausible deniability. The person who authorized the purchase is currently a 3-star general. He sits on several oversight committees. He has friends in Congress, and he's been using those chemical weapons to eliminate people who could threaten his operations. "Eliminate," Emma repeated. "You mean murder." "I mean systematic assassination of military and government personnel who possess knowledge of illegal weapons programs." Carlyle's voice was steady, like he was describing weather patterns rather than murder. "Your patient, Marcus Chen Webb, was a security consultant who'd been investigating irregularities in supply chain accounting. He was close to finding documentary evidence of the weapons purchases, so he was targeted. And the other 5 patients? Similar situations, different reasons for having discovered information that couldn't be allowed to circulate." Carlyle closed the file. "We've known about this operation for approximately 4 months. We've been investigating quietly, building evidence, following the chain of command to see where this goes. And then I walked into Ridgemont General and started connecting dots. And then you connected dots faster than we expected." There was something almost like respect in Carlyle's expression. "You identified a pattern we'd been seeing but couldn't publicly acknowledge. You made it undeniable by forcing medical analysis and creating a paper trail that exists outside classified channels." Emma understood what he was saying. She'd forced the situation into the open by being where she was when she was, by identifying the pattern, by refusing to accept the convenient explanations. "Who's the general?" she asked. Carlyle hesitated. That pause was significant. General Richard Stratton, he finally said. 234 years of military family history, distinguished service record, multiple medals, currently serving as Deputy Director of Strategic Operations. Emma had heard the name before. Military circles were small enough that anyone who paid attention knew who Stratton was. A man who'd built a reputation as someone willing to make the hard choices, someone willing to do what others wouldn't, someone willing to commit murder if it served what he believed was the greater good. "What are you going to do?" Emma asked. "That depends entirely on what you do." Carlyle leaned back in his chair. "We have evidence. Not enough to prosecute, but enough to force a retirement, enough to ensure his security clearances are revoked, enough to make his life very, very difficult. But we need something else. We need him to make a move, to do something that crosses a line so clear that there's no ambiguity. You want me to bait him? I want you to be visible, to exist in the official record as someone who knows too much, to be the kind of liability that might push him into making a mistake." Emma stood, walked to the window. Outside was nothing but concrete and security fixtures, not a view of the city, not anything that suggested the world continued to exist beyond these walls. "You're asking me to be a target," she said quietly. "I'm asking you to be a witness that he can't silence through normal channels. I'm asking you to be so officially acknowledged and so heavily protected that any move against you becomes undeniable. And if he decides the equation has changed, if he decides I'm worth the risk, then we stop him." Carlyle's voice was flat. "Before he gets anywhere near you, because he's not fighting us in shadows anymore. He's fighting us in the light, and we have considerably more resources than he does." Emma turned back. "I want guarantees." "I can't give you guarantees. I can give you security details. I can give you placement in a protected location. I can give you full military authority to implement defensive measures. But I can't guarantee nothing bad happens. That's not how the world works." It wasn't what Emma wanted to hear. But it was honest, and honesty was worth something. "I'm in," she said, "but I want to see General Wallace. He's already agreed to similar terms. He's in another facility, protected, waiting for you to confirm your participation." "And Agent Webb?" "The FBI has him. Different agency, different protections, but he's alive and he's safe and he's cooperating fully." Emma nodded slowly. The pieces were starting to align. Not into justice, exactly, but into something that resembled accountability. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we wait, and we monitor, and we watch General Stratton very carefully to see if the pressure forces him into a mistake." The waiting lasted 5 days. Emma was placed in a secure facility that was ostensibly a military hospital, but functioned more like a very comfortable prison. She had a room overlooking a small courtyard. She had access to classified briefing materials about the chemical weapons operation. She had security personnel visible and invisible, making sure nothing happened that shouldn't. What she didn't have was freedom. On the 6th day, General Stratton made his move. The announcement came through every official channel simultaneously. Press releases, news broadcasts, official statements from the Department of Defense. General Richard Stratton was retiring from active duty effective immediately, citing personal health reasons and desire to spend time with family. It was so perfectly timed that Emma knew something had broken. Carlyle appeared in her room 30 minutes later, looking simultaneously triumphant and grim. "He's running," Carlyle said without preamble. "We triggered surveillance alerts this morning. He's liquidating assets, moving money through channels we'd flagged. He's preparing to disappear." "Can you stop him?" "We can stop him at the border. We can stop him if he tries to leave the country, but we need him to try." Carlyle's expression was stone. "We need him to make the attempt so we can arrest him and make it stick. Right now, we have suspicion and circumstantial evidence. If he runs, he confirms guilt, and then we can move openly." "You're using me as bait for a trap." "I'm using you as evidence that he can't run from accountability, and it's working. He's panicking. He's making mistakes. He's doing exactly what guilty people do when they realize the walls are closing in." Emma's hands were shaking. Rage or adrenaline, she couldn't tell the difference anymore. "How long?" she asked. 48 hours. We're watching his movements. The moment he tries to flee, we move. And then this is over." But it wasn't over 48 hours later. What happened instead was General Stratton submitted his full confession to the Joint Chiefs. Every detail, every transaction, every assassination, every illegal weapons purchase, everything recorded in a statement that ran to 237 pages and detailed a systematic campaign of murder that had been running for 8 years. The announcement came through official channels in the late afternoon. By evening, it was on every news broadcast in the country. Emma watched it from her secure room, listening to news anchors struggle to explain how a decorated general had been running a private assassination program inside the federal government, how chemical weapons that were supposed to be destroyed had instead been purchased and stockpiled, how 6 civilians had been systematically poisoned by a military operation designed to eliminate threats to black budget programs. It was national scandal on a scale that hadn't been seen in decades. And then, before any of it could fully process, before any real investigation could begin, before any legal proceedings could be formalized, General Richard Stratton was found dead in his quarters. Officially, it was a suicide. Overdose. A note expressing remorse and inability to face the consequences of his actions. Everything neat and clean and final. Emma was in the cafeteria when she heard. A junior officer mentioned it casually to someone next to her, not realizing she was listening. Dead. Just like that. Before he could face trial, before he could testify about who knew what and when they knew it, before anything could be questioned or challenged or investigated beyond the official narrative. She found Carlyle in his office. "You killed him," she said quietly. Carlyle didn't look up from his desk. General Stratton chose to end his life rather than face the consequences of his actions. "You killed him to stop him from talking." "I did no such thing." Carlyle's voice remained level. "The autopsy results are conclusive. Self-administered overdose. A man who couldn't face public disgrace made a final choice. After making a full confession. After making a confession that detailed his crimes and his crimes alone, with no mention of anyone else's involvement or knowledge or complicity." Emma's blood went cold. "How many people knew?" she asked. "How many people in government knew about these operations and did nothing?" "That's not for me to say." "How many people authorized this?" "The investigation is ongoing." "You're covering it up." Emma's voice was steel. "He confesses, you arrest him, he takes his own life. And somehow that's the end of it. Nobody else investigates. Nobody else gets charged. Nobody else faces consequences. Just him. Just Stratton. Just one man carrying all the guilt while the system that created him walks away clean." Carlyle finally looked at her. His expression was sad in a way that suggested he'd made peace with this particular moral compromise a long time ago. "That's how it works," he said quietly. "That's how it always works. You find someone at the top, you make an example of them, and everyone below them learns to be more careful, to be more discreet, to make sure their crimes don't get exposed in ways that can't be contained. That's not justice. No. It's institutional preservation. It's damage control. It's the difference between a country that maintains continuity through difficult moments and a country that collapses because too many people at too many levels started facing consequences simultaneously." Emma felt something inside her break. Not violently, just a fracture along a line that had been forming since the moment she realized this system was so much larger than any individual person. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now you're released from protective custody. You're given a commendation for your service to the country. You're offered a position in military medical research if you want it, or you're allowed to go back to your quiet life. Your choice. And the 6 patients? Safe. Protected. Recovering. They'll be compensated for their injuries. Government care. Lifetime medical benefits. They'll be comfortable." "Comfortable," Emma repeated. "But nobody dies for poisoning them. Nobody stands trial. Nobody faces justice." "General Stratton died. That's something. That's not justice. That's theater." Carlyle's expression hardened. "That's the world, Captain. That's how power actually operates. Not through dramatic trials where truth is revealed and justice is served. Through quiet adjustments where the minimum acceptable damage is achieved and the system remains intact." Emma walked out. She made it as far as the corridor before stopping, because she understood something in that moment that changed everything. Carlyle had let her walk out, deliberately, which meant he wanted her gone, which meant having her in the facility, knowing what she knew, was now a liability. She turned back, opened his office door without knocking. "There's more, isn't there?" she said. "More than just Stratton, more than just this operation." Carlyle didn't deny it. That silence was confirmation. "How deep does this go?" Emma asked. "Deeper than you want to know, deeper than I want to talk about, and certainly deeper than either of us is going to discuss standing in my office." "Why tell me anything? Why not just disappear me like you did Stratton?" "Because you're not part of the system," Carlyle said quietly. "You're an outsider who stumbled in. You disrupted things by accident. The people inside the system, the people who are actually complicit, they understand how this works. They understand that staying quiet and staying alive are not mutually exclusive. But you're idealistic enough to think justice is supposed to work a particular way. That puts you in a category I'd rather not create." Emma understood what he was saying. She was dangerous not because she could expose the system, but because she believed the system should be exposed. That made her unreliable. That made her someone who might go to the press or Congress or public channels with information they couldn't control. "What about Wallace?" Emma asked. "General Wallace is retiring from military service. He'll receive full honors. He'll receive a pension that reflects his service. He'll understand that some victories look like compromises to civilians, but are actually acceptable outcomes to military leadership." "And Webb?" "Agent Webb is being reassigned to a field office in Montana. He'll have a very successful career investigating white-collar crime in rural America. He'll also understand that certain investigations end when the government stops authorizing resources. It was also perfectly arranged, so systematically managed, so completely designed to contain everything while appearing to address it." Emma walked out of Carlyle's office and kept walking. She made it to the exit before security personnel stopped her. Not aggressively, just professionally informing her that she couldn't leave without authorization. She called Carlyle. He came downstairs personally and walked her to the gate. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Somewhere that isn't here." "The media will find you. They'll want interviews. They'll want your story. Then I'll tell them the truth." Carlyle smiled sadly. "The truth is a flexible thing, Captain. What you experienced is one version. What the official record will show is another. And by the time the news cycle moves on, the version that remains will be whatever the people with institutional authority decided it should be." Emma walked through the gate into the Virginia afternoon. Behind her, the facility disappeared into concrete and security measures. Ahead of her, the city sprawled in all its complicated messiness. She had her military pension, she had a commendation, she had officially nothing left to prove or fight for. But she had something else too. She had recordings. Every briefing she'd been given, every file she'd reviewed, every conversation Carlyle had initiated had been recorded through methods she'd learned in military training, covert audio capture that left no trace and violated probably 7 different federal statutes. She had evidence. Actual, concrete, undeniable evidence. And she had decided something very important. She wasn't going to let this end the way Carlyle intended. Emma found a coffee shop with secure Wi-Fi and uploaded everything to 3 separate cloud servers, each in a different country with strong privacy laws. She created encrypted backups. She sent anonymous packages to journalists she'd researched. She contacted representatives from the House Oversight Committee through channels that couldn't be easily traced. Then she bought a ticket on a cross-country bus and started running again. Not from the truth this time, from the system that wanted the truth buried. By the time Carlyle figured out what she'd done, it was too late. The information was already spreading, the recordings were already being analyzed. The news networks were already beginning investigations that couldn't be stopped because they were grounded in documented evidence rather than conjecture or suspicion. Emma watched it unfold from a motel room in Nebraska, sitting in front of a television that showed the first broadcasts of the recordings she'd released. News anchors reading statements about chemical weapons programs, about systematic assassinations, about government officials covering up crimes, about a system designed to protect itself at any cost. 3 days later, Carlyle announced his retirement. 4 days later, 7 other officials either retired or resigned. By the end of the week, congressional oversight committees were demanding investigations. The FBI was launching formal inquiries. The media was beginning to understand the scope of what had been hidden. Emma packed her single bag and prepared to run again, because she understood something that Carlyle hadn't anticipated. Once the truth was out, it didn't matter whether she was alive or dead. The system had been fractured. The machinery had been disrupted, and the people who'd benefited from silence now had to face a world where silence was no longer an option. She was walking out of the motel room when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but she did. "Captain Reeves," a female voice said. "This is Senator Patricia Morrison. I'm calling because I've reviewed the materials you released, and I want to discuss formal congressional testimony. More specifically, I want to discuss what happened to General Stratton." Emma's stomach tightened. The official investigation concluded suicide. The official investigation was conducted by people who had every reason to want that conclusion to stick. "I'm proposing an independent investigation, and I need your testimony to make it credible. Are you willing to testify publicly before Congress?" Emma looked out the window at the Nebraska horizon, flat, empty, stretching toward a future she couldn't quite see. "Yes," she said, "I'll testify." Because she'd finally understood what Carlyle had never fully grasped. Justice wasn't supposed to be contained. It wasn't supposed to be managed. It was supposed to break things that were designed to be unbreakable. And sometimes the only way to serve justice was to stop running and start fighting, even if that meant facing everything she'd been hiding from for 4 years. The congressional hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Emma spent that time in hiding, moving between safe houses arranged by Senator Morrison's staff. They weren't military facilities. They were civilian locations, a retired professor's cabin in Vermont, a lawyer's vacation home in Maine, a bookstore owner's apartment above her shop in Baltimore. People who believed that some fights were worth the risk. Emma used the time to prepare, to review every file, to memorize every detail, to understand exactly what she'd be walking into when she sat before those cameras and microphones. Wallace called her on the 8th day. She almost didn't recognize his voice. It had aged somehow, grown rougher. "They're trying to discredit you before you testify," he said without greeting. "Leaking information about your medical separation, suggesting PTSD, suggesting your judgment is compromised by trauma. Is it working? Not with the people who matter. Senator Morrison has your back. So do about 14 other senators who are tired of being lied to by their own military. But the media is divided. Some outlets are running with the official narrative. Others are digging deeper." Emma sat in the Baltimore apartment, watching rain streak the windows. Below, people moved through their lives, buying books and coffee and newspapers, completely unaware that their government was fracturing above their heads. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Wallace was quiet for a moment. "I spent 34 years believing the system worked, that people who did wrong faced consequences, that institutions were fundamentally designed to serve the public, and now I'm watching that belief get dismantled piece by piece." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I needed to see it. We all needed to see it." He paused. "Emma, when you testify, they're going to try to break you. They're going to ask questions designed to make you look unreliable. They're going to challenge your credentials and your stability and your motives. Are you ready for that?" "I've been broken before." It didn't stick. Wallace laughed, but it sounded painful. "That's what I thought you'd say." "Good luck, Captain." The hearing room was smaller than Emma expected. Television always made these spaces look massive, dramatic, stage-lit. In reality, it was just a room with too many chairs and too many cameras and too many people wearing expressions that suggested they'd rather be anywhere else. Senator Morrison sat at the center of the panel. 60-something, gray hair cut sharp, eyes that missed nothing. She'd built a career on oversight and accountability, which meant she'd also built a career on being hated by people who preferred their corruption undisturbed. Emma was sworn in. Hand on a book, promised to tell the truth. The whole ridiculous ritual that was supposed to mean something but mostly just felt like theater. Morrison started with the easy questions. Name, rank, service history. The kind of information that established credibility and gave the audience time to form opinions about whether Emma looked trustworthy. Then she shifted. "Captain Reeves, can you describe what you observed at Ridgemont General Hospital on the night of the chemical exposure incident?" Emma walked through it, every detail. The blood trail, the patient's presentation, the vial she'd found in his belongings, the way her training had recognized patterns that civilian physicians missed, the way she'd initiated containment protocols while being actively undermined by hospital administration. She didn't editorialize, didn't add dramatic flair. just stated facts in the flattest voice she could manage. The room was silent when she finished. A senator from the opposition party, Reynolds, his nameplate said, leaned forward. Ms. Reeves, you claim you were being terminated from your position at the time this incident occurred. Can you explain why the hospital administration had lost confidence in your judgment? Captain Reeves, Emma corrected quietly. And I can't speak to their motivations. I can only speak to what happened. But you were facing dismissal, for insubordination, for questioning physician authority, for creating what your supervisor called a hostile work environment. I questioned decisions that would have resulted in patient deaths. If that's insubordination, I'm guilty. Reynolds smiled like he'd just scored a point. So you admit to having a confrontational relationship with hospital leadership. I admit to prioritizing patient safety over institutional politics. Morrison intervened. Senator Reynolds, Captain Reeves' employment status at Ridgemont General is not the subject of this hearing. The subject is the systematic assassination program conducted by General Richard Stratton using chemical weapons purchased through illegal channels. Perhaps we could return to that topic. Reynolds sat back, but the damage was done. The question had been planted. Emma's credibility had been challenged on national television. The questioning continued for 3 hours. Emma answered every question as precisely as she could. She described Marcus Chen Webb's symptoms. She explained how she'd identified the chronic poisoning pattern. She detailed the federal response and the subsequent lockdown. And then Morrison asked the question that mattered. Captain Reeves, based on your interactions with Director Carlisle and other officials, do you believe General Stratton acted alone in this operation? The room went still. Emma chose her words carefully. Based on the briefings I received, the infrastructure required to conduct this operation over 8 years would have required multiple levels of authorization and support, chemical weapons purchases, budget allocations, personnel assignments, cover-up operations. That's not one person. That's institutional involvement. And yet General Stratton's confession mentions no other participants. General Stratton's confession was submitted shortly before his death. I believe he was either coerced into accepting sole responsibility, or he understood that protecting others was the price of some other consideration. Are you suggesting his death wasn't a suicide? I'm suggesting the official investigation was conducted by people with vested interest in a particular outcome. I think an independent autopsy would be appropriate. The room erupted, not literally. Congressional hearings didn't do that. But the energy shifted. Phones appeared. Aides started whispering. Cameras focused harder on Emma's face. Morrison let the chaos settle before continuing. Captain Reeves, you released classified recordings to the media. That's a serious federal crime. Why did you do it? Emma had known this question was coming. She'd prepared for it. But because I believe the alternative was those recordings disappearing. I believe that people deserved to know their government had conducted chemical weapons assassinations on American soil. I believe that protecting institutional reputation was less important than protecting human lives. I still believe that. Even though it could result in your prosecution? Even though. Morrison nodded slowly. Thank you, Captain. I have no further questions. The opposition party senators took their turns. They tried to paint her as unstable, as someone with an axe to grind against authority, as someone whose military service had left her unable to function in civilian society. Emma answered each attack with the same flat precision. Never defensive, never emotional, just factual. By the time the hearing concluded, she was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. She'd been picked apart on national television. Her service had been questioned. Her motives had been challenged. Her entire existence had been reduced to ammunition in a political battle she hadn't started and couldn't control. But she'd told the truth. That was something. Outside the hearing room, Senator Morrison caught up with her. That was brutal, Morrison said quietly. You handled it well. Did I? You didn't break. You didn't get angry. You didn't give them anything they could use to discredit you further. That's all we needed. Emma leaned against the wall. The corridor was mostly empty now. Aides had scattered. Reporters had gone to file stories. The machinery of government had moved on to the next crisis. What happens now? Emma asked. Now the committee investigates. We subpoena records. We interview witnesses. We try to figure out how deep this actually goes and who needs to face consequences. And if the investigation gets blocked, Morrison's expression hardened. Then we go public with everything we find. We make it loud enough that blocking us becomes politically impossible. That's how this works. We don't win by being right. We win by making it too expensive to keep lying. That's not justice. No, but it's progress. And sometimes progress is all we get. Emma left Washington that night. She took a train to Philadelphia, then a bus to Pittsburgh, then another bus to Cleveland. She moved through the country like someone trying to outrun a shadow, even though the shadow was already everywhere. The media coverage was relentless. Every network had a take. Some painted her as a hero, others as a traitor. Most just showed the same clips over and over, Emma answering questions in that flat, emotionless voice that made her look either incredibly strong or incredibly damaged, depending on the viewer's preconceptions. The patients started reaching out after the second week. Marcus Chen Webb's sister called first. Her voice shook when Emma answered. "He's awake," she said. "The doctors say he's going to make it. His kidneys are damaged and he'll need dialysis for the rest of his life, but he's alive, and he wanted me to thank you." Emma didn't know how to respond to that. She'd done what any medic would do. She'd identified the threat and initiated treatment. The fact that it had saved lives was just the outcome of proper protocol. But she said thank you anyway, because the woman needed to hear it. The other patients or their families followed. 5 more calls over the next month. 5 more people alive because Emma had recognized patterns and refused to be silenced. That was worth something too. The congressional investigation took 6 months. Emma wasn't directly involved. She'd given her testimony and released her evidence. The rest was up to people who understood political machinery better than she did. She spent that time working at a free clinic in Detroit. Nobody asked about her military service. Nobody cared about the congressional hearing. They just needed a nurse who could handle trauma cases and didn't flinch at the sight of blood. Emma didn't flinch. She never had. The investigation's findings were released on a Tuesday morning. Emma was in the middle of treating a gunshot wound when someone turned on the television in the waiting room. 7 officials had been implicated. 3 had already resigned. 4 were facing criminal charges for obstruction of justice and falsification of federal records. General Stratton's death had been reclassified as suspicious circumstances pending independent review. The chemical weapons program had been officially acknowledged and shut down. It wasn't everything Emma had hoped for, but it was something. Director Carlisle wasn't among the officials charged. He'd retired 6 months earlier, citing health reasons. Officially, he was clear of wrongdoing. Unofficially, Emma suspected he'd made deals that kept his name out of the public record in exchange for cooperation. That was how power worked. The people at the very top rarely faced consequences. They just moved sideways into comfortable retirements while everyone below them absorbed the damage. But the system had been disrupted. People were asking questions now. Oversight committees were investigating programs they'd previously ignored. The machinery had been forced into visibility. That was progress. Emma finished treating the gunshot victim, through and through, no major vessels hit. The kid would be fine, and walked outside into the Detroit afternoon. Her phone rang. Senator Morrison. "Captain Reeves, I wanted to let you know before it hits the news. The House Oversight Committee just voted to establish a permanent investigative body focused on military black budget programs. They're calling it the Accountability and Transparency Commission, and they've asked if you'd be willing to serve as a medical consultant." Emma leaned against the clinic wall. What would that involve? Reviewing classified medical programs, identifying ethical violations, providing expert testimony when programs cross into illegal territory. It's not a full-time position, more like being on call when we need someone who understands both military operations and medical ethics. Someone who can't be easily silenced. Someone who's already proven she won't be silenced. Yes, Emma watched traffic move past. People going about their lives, carrying groceries, walking dogs, existing in the ordinary world that required no knowledge of chemical weapons programs or congressional investigations. She'd wanted that world. She'd tried to disappear into it. But maybe the answer wasn't disappearing. Maybe the answer was using what she knew to make sure the system couldn't hide anymore. "I'll do it," she said. "Thank you, Captain. I'll send over the paperwork." 3 months later, Emma stood in a different hearing room. Not testifying this time, consulting, reviewing medical files from a classified program that had been conducting unauthorized pharmaceutical trials on active duty personnel without informed consent. The program's director sat across from her, looking like he'd swallowed glass. Captain Reeves, these trials followed all appropriate protocols, he insisted. Emma looked at him with the same expression she'd given Jonathan Pritchard all those months ago in Ridgemont General's emergency department. They followed protocols you created to avoid oversight, she said quietly. They didn't follow informed consent requirements. They didn't follow medical ethics standards. They didn't follow the basic principle that people have a right to know what's being done to their bodies. We were trying to develop treatments that could save lives in combat situations. By violating the lives of the people you were supposed to protect, that's not medicine, that's experimentation, and it's illegal. The committee voted to shut down the program. The director was referred for criminal investigation. The personnel who'd been unknowingly subjected to the trials were offered medical monitoring and compensation. It wasn't justice for what had already happened, but it prevented future harm. Emma walked out of the hearing into the afternoon sun and called Wallace. He answered on the first ring. "How'd it go?" he asked. Another program shut down, another director facing investigation, another small piece of accountability. "You sound tired." "I am tired, but I'm also okay." Emma paused. "I wanted to thank you for calling me that first day, for pushing me to invoke my status instead of disappearing. I needed that." Wallace was quiet for a moment. "You know what I've learned through all this? The system doesn't change because good people exist inside it. The system changes because good people refuse to accept the way it operates. You refused. That matters more than you probably realize." "It doesn't feel like enough." "It never does, but it's more than what existed before you started. That's how progress works, incremental, frustrating, never as dramatic as we want it to be, but real." They talked for another few minutes before Wallace had to go. Retirement hadn't slowed him down. He was teaching now, military ethics at a university in California. Emma stood on the steps of the congressional building and watched the city move around her. Washington had a particular energy, a sense of machinery turning, decisions being made, power being exercised in ways both visible and invisible. She'd been part of that machinery once, had served it without questioning, had believed that the system was fundamentally good, and that the people inside it were fundamentally trying to do right. She didn't believe that anymore. But she believed something else instead. She believed that systems could be disrupted, that power could be challenged, that the people who'd been dismissed and underestimated and pushed aside were often the ones who saw the truth most clearly. A year after the congressional hearing, Emma received a package at her Detroit apartment. No return address. Just a small box with her name on it. Inside was a military commendation, the Distinguished Service Cross, for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations involving conflict with an armed enemy of the United States. Except there was no armed enemy mentioned, no battle, no combat operation, just a note, handwritten, signed by Senator Morrison, for refusing to accept that some fights are too big to win, for understanding that heroism isn't always loud, for showing us what accountability actually looks like when people stop hiding from it. Emma held the commendation for a long time. Then she put it in a drawer beneath some old medical journals and her expired military ID. She didn't need awards. She needed the system to work better, needed hospitals to protect patients instead of reputations, needed government programs to face oversight instead of operating in shadows, needed people in power to understand that authority came with responsibility, not immunity. Those things were happening now, slowly, imperfectly, but happening. That was enough. Emma went back to work at the Detroit clinic. She treated gunshot wounds and overdoses and all the everyday trauma that happened when systems failed people in smaller, quieter ways. And when the Accountability Commission called, which happened every few months, she reviewed files and asked hard questions and made sure the pattern she'd identified in Ridgemont General didn't repeat itself elsewhere. 2 years later, she was invited back to Ridgemont General. The hospital had changed leadership. Pritchard was gone, officially retired, unofficially forced out after the investigation revealed falsified records and deliberate negligence. The new chief medical officer was a woman named Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, who'd spent 15 years working in public health before taking the position. We're rebuilding, Okonkwo said when she called. New protocols, new culture, new commitment to actually listening when staff identify problems. And I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to come speak to our emergency department about what happened, about what we learned, about how to do better. Emma almost said no. Going back felt like reopening a wound that had mostly healed. But then she thought about the nurses who were working there now. The ones who might face situations where speaking up meant risking their jobs. The ones who needed to know that challenging authority wasn't insubordination, it was medicine. "I'll come," she said. The emergency department was packed when Emma arrived. Every physician, every nurse, every technician, even administrators she didn't recognize. They'd set up chairs in the trauma bay. The same trauma bay where she'd treated Marcus Chen Webb, where she'd identified the chemical exposure while being actively undermined, where she'd made the choice to trust her training instead of her supervisor's authority. Emma stood at the front and looked at the faces watching her, young, old, experienced, and brand new, all of them carrying the particular exhaustion that came from working in emergency medicine. "I'm not here to tell you a hero story," she said. "I'm here to tell you about a nurse who almost got fired for doing her job correctly, who spent months being dismissed by physicians who assumed they knew better, who ended up in the middle of a national scandal because she recognized a pattern that everyone else missed." She walked them through it. The blood trail, the patient, the vial. The moment she'd made the decision to initiate containment protocols despite Pritchard's orders. "The thing about authority," Emma said quietly, "is that it's supposed to serve a purpose. It's supposed to create order and safety and consistent care. But when authority becomes more important than the people it's supposed to protect, it stops being legitimate. And when you see that happening, you have a choice. You can stay quiet and keep your job, or you can speak up and risk everything." The room was silent. "I won't tell you which choice to make," Emma continued, "because the consequences are real. You can lose your position, your reputation, your sense of safety. But I will tell you this, if you stay quiet when you know something's wrong, you'll carry that with you. And eventually, the weight of what you didn't say becomes heavier than the risk of speaking up would have been." A young nurse raised her hand. "What if nobody listens? What if you speak up and nothing changes?" "Then you document everything. You create a paper trail. You make your concerns official. Because the truth is, most institutional failures aren't dramatic explosions. They're slow accumulations of small compromises. And the only way to stop that is to refuse to participate, to be the person who says this isn't acceptable, even when everyone else has normalized it." Another nurse, older, maybe in her 50s, stood. "I worked here when you were here. I saw what Pritchard did to you, and I didn't say anything. I'm sorry." Emma met her eyes. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to make sure the next person in my situation doesn't face it alone. That's what changes systems, not individual heroism. Collective refusal to accept dysfunction as normal." The session lasted 2 hours. Emma answered questions about chemical exposure protocols, about recognizing patterns, about navigating situations where medical judgment conflicted with institutional authority. But mostly, she talked about what it felt like to be dismissed, to be treated like your expertise didn't matter because your rank wasn't high enough, to be right and have nobody believe you until disaster forced them to acknowledge it. When it ended, Dr. Okonkwo approached. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know this wasn't easy." "It was necessary," Emma replied. And actually, it helped, saying it out loud, acknowledging that it happened. That matters. "We've implemented new protocols, anonymous reporting systems, mandatory review of any termination decision involving patient safety concerns. We're trying to make sure what happened to you can't happen again." That's good. But protocols only work if people use them. If the culture still punishes speaking up, the protocols are just paperwork. "Then I guess we need to keep changing the culture." Okonkwo paused. "There's a position open, Emergency Department Clinical Coordinator, someone who oversees training and protocol implementation, someone who can advocate for staff when conflicts arise. I think you'd be good at it." Emma looked around the emergency department, the same space where she'd fought to save lives while being told to leave, the same trauma bay where everything had started. "I have a job in Detroit," she said, "and I consult for Congress. I'm not sure I can—" "Think about it," Okonkwo interrupted. "No pressure, but the offer stands. We need people who understand that medicine is supposed to serve patients, not institutional convenience. You understand that better than anyone. Emma left Ridgemont General that afternoon with more to consider than she'd expected. She drove through the city, Hollow Creek, Oregon, where she'd tried to build a quiet life and ended up in the center of a national scandal instead. The city looked different now, not physically, but emotionally. It wasn't the place where she'd failed. It was the place where she'd refused to fail quietly. That mattered. 6 months later, Emma accepted the position at Ridgemont General, not because she'd forgiven what had happened, but because she'd decided that the best response to institutional failure wasn't running away. It was building something better in the same space where the failure had occurred. She worked with Dr. Okonkwo to redesign protocols. She trained staff on how to escalate concerns without fear of retaliation. She created systems that made speaking up the norm rather than the exception. And when nurses came to her with concerns about physicians overriding their judgment, or administrators prioritizing reputation over safety, or any of the thousand small dysfunctions that accumulate in hospitals, she listened. She investigated. She advocated. She became the person she'd needed when she was being dismissed by Pritchard. 3 years after this chemical exposure incident, Emma stood in the same emergency department and watched a young nurse named Rachel challenge a physician's discharge decision. The physician was irritated. The nurse was nervous but persistent. The patient's vitals were borderline. Emma stepped in before the situation escalated. "Let's review the case together," she said calmly. "Walk me through what you're seeing," Rachel explained. The physician defended his decision. Emma asked questions that made both of them think harder about the clinical picture. In the end, they kept the patient for observation. 6 hours later, he developed symptoms that would have been fatal if he'd been sent home. Rachel found Emma afterward. "Thank you," she said, "for backing me up, for not making me feel stupid for questioning him." "You weren't questioning him, you were questioning the decision. There's a difference." Emma smiled. "And you were right. That's what matters, not rank, not hierarchy, patient safety." "Is it always this hard?" "Yes, but it gets easier when you know you're not alone. When you know the system will support you instead of punishing you. That's what we're building here. That's what makes this work." Emma went home that night to an apartment that didn't feel temporary anymore. She made dinner, she read files for an upcoming congressional consultation, she planned training sessions for the next month. And she realized something she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding behind anonymity or new identities or quiet lives in places nobody would look. She was standing in the open, using her name, using her experience, using everything she'd learned in those years of classified deployments and battlefield medicine. She was finally doing what she'd trained for, not treating casualties in combat zones, but preventing casualties by fixing the systems that created them. That was the work. That was the purpose she'd been missing. The military bracelet still sat in her drawer at home. She wore it sometimes now, when she needed to remember who she'd been and what she'd survived. But mostly, she didn't need the reminder. She carried it in the way she walked through hospital corridors, in the way she listened to nurses who were afraid to speak up, in the way she challenged decisions that prioritized convenience over care. She carried it in the quiet certainty that some fights were worth the cost, and that the people who'd been dismissed, underestimated, and pushed aside were often the ones who changed everything, not by being perfect, not by being heroes, but by refusing to accept that wrong was acceptable just because it was normal. Emma Reeves had been a combat medic, a classified operator, a nurse who'd been fired for doing her job correctly. Now she was something else, something harder to define but easier to recognize. She was someone who'd looked at a broken system and decided that the appropriate response wasn't escape, it was reconstruction. That was the work that mattered, not dramatic, not always visible, but real. And she was finally home.